Thank you, everyone. It was a wonderful conversation about tropes.
Yes, thank you, everybody. And if I haven't scared you off too much, stick around. I'm gonna read to you. I actually have a choice for you because I've got 2 books coming out this summer. So we can read a little bit of 2 or a lot of 1. Any choices?
Well, how long is each reading?
Not long. Not very
Well,
long.
then read both. That way
All
we
right,
can have a lot of
I'll give
discussions
everyone
about
a
both
little bit.
books.
I'll give a little bit of both. Okay, so
You got a half hour.
I've got a half hour. Well, you'll probably get sick of hearing me read before that. So let me grab a swig of water. Okay, so this week, actually, I am going to read to you for that one first. I have a book, a novella, very short novella, coming out this week that is called A Fine Joke. And Fine Joke was basically written, I won't say how many years ago, because I wrote it for my friend's 60th birthday. So she'd probably prefer I didn't say exactly how many years ago that was. And kind of definitely written in the seat of my pants style, and just kind of bopped it along and saw what happened. So that is, it's been cleaned up and made more rational for publication. And that's going to happen this week. All right, so what I am actually going to read to you, basically the story starts like this. Darcy is given a death sentence. And again, it's a joke. This is dark humor. Don't worry, I'm not going to kill him. But he is given a death sentence by a doctor and told to get his affairs in order, basically. And so the one affair, this is post Hunsford, and he decides, he's like, I got to go back to Elizabeth and I got to tell her she's got to marry me because I need to hurry up and create an heir before I keel over. So that's where we're at right now in the story. We are with Darcy. He's going on his way to try to win Elizabeth over by virtue of the fact that he's going to die. Okay, so this is chapter 3. And again, I'm not great at this, so I'll probably stumble over stuff and, maybe cough a little. So my apologies. So this is chapter 3, The Offer. For the duration of the journey from London to Hertfordshire, Darcy put aside his cares and worries for his non-existent future and thought solely of Elizabeth. Time is of the essence. I need her to marry me as soon as possible, ideally by license, but if she wishes the banns called, the first of them should be called on Sunday. It seemed nearly impossible, but he knew it had to be. Every day that passed was one less day he had to conceive his heir. Of course, it was also one less day he had to enjoy the pleasures of marriage with the only woman he had ever known who made him wish to marry. He did not intend to lose many such days. He departed London at first light, arriving in Meryton just after the noon hour was struck. He had wished to call at Longbourn immediately, but alas, found himself in need of a rest just as soon as his carriage pulled up at Netherfield. He refreshed himself, intending to do all he could to overcome, but he found he was simply unable to do so. The sweet arms of Morpheus beckoned and refused to be denied. It was just beyond 3 in the afternoon, he noted, as he set out for Longbourn after his rest. Not so very late. However, late as he was in arriving at Longbourn, he was soon surprised to learn he was, in truth, too early. Elizabeth, it would seem, had not yet returned from London. She remained with her aunt and uncle after her time in Kent, Mr. Bennet explained, seeming a bit curious about Darcy's inquiry. A few days in London, but we expect her later today, around 4. Ah, said Darcy absently. Yes, I had not considered that she would stay in London. I am surprised, Mr. Darcy, that you have given any consideration whatsoever to my daughter's whereabouts. Darcy returned full attention to the very sly and discerning Mr. Bennet, mortified to feel a blush spread across his face. A moment of contemplation decided him. What was the advantage in false denials and demurrals, when with good fortune, he would be applying to this gentleman for his daughter's hand in just the coming days? I wish to speak to your daughter, Mr. Bennet, on a matter of great import. Perhaps you will grant me leave to call tomorrow? Mr. Bennet eyed him, unspeaking and unsmiling. A private conference? Yes. More silent study of Darcy's countenance and person ensued. At last, speaking as if each word was being painfully extracted from him, Mr. Bennet said, "We will host a small neighborhood dinner tomorrow to welcome the girls home and permit them to see their friends. You are welcome to join us. I will inform my wife." Darcy beamed broadly. "I thank you for the kind invitation. I'm happy to accept. Come early," said Mr. Bennet. "I will see that you have some time alone with Lizzie before the others arrive." The next day dawned fair and warm, and Darcy found himself with a long day in which to amuse himself. He decided he would walk towards Meryton, ostensibly to pass the time, but in truth hoping he might see Elizabeth. Fields did not like the idea, nearly begging to call the carriage, but Darcy would not hear it. "You may come behind me in the carriage if you would like," he said. "I, however, shall walk. I am not yet so frail that walking into Meryton shall fatigue me." It was pleasant to be out, and Darcy filled his lungs with the fresh air, letting sunshine bathe his skin. Despite his bold assurances to Fields, by the time he reached Meryton, he was indeed tired, and he appreciated the idea that his man and his carriage would not be long behind him. There was a little bookshop in Meryton, and he entered it, thinking he would wait within until he saw his conveyance. As he entered, he nearly collided with none other than George Wickham. Both men drew back, the suddenness and nature of their meeting making them both immediately wary. Mr. Wickham was first in the attempt to exit the awkward encounter. He stepped to the sides, touching the brim of his hat, and said, "Pray excuse me." Darcy had recovered by then, and though he was loath to owe anything to this man, he wished to settle his accounts, even this one. It should not be said that Fitzwilliam Darcy would meet his maker with the stain of implacable resentment upon him, particularly one towards who had, by all reports, saved him. "A minute, George." Mr. Wickham turned cold, albeit surprised eyes upon him. "George? That is still your name, is it not? Very well, Fitz, what do you want?" It was then that Darcy spied his carriage, and desirous of privacy, he gestured towards it. A word, nothing more. Wickham nodded, looking curious, and the two men went towards the carriage. No matter what his intentions were, nor how noble his cause, Darcy could not like being in company with such a man as Wickham, and he resolved to say what needed said with due haste. The pair settled themselves in the plush carriage, George looking around him with some jealousy, but saying nothing. Fields was in the carriage, having come bearing Darcy's tinctures and remedies. He held out a bottle to his master straight away, wordlessly asking if he required dosing. Darcy waved him off, asking him to leave them alone. Fields capped his bottle and left, but not without Wickham looking with interest at the bottle. "There has been a great deal come between us," Darcy began. "Such as the fact that you have become an insufferable arse," said Wickham. Darcy ignored the insult, as well as the opportunity to point out that Wickham had become dissipated and unscrupulous. "I have recently learned of something that has changed the way that I feel about our long-standing breach. To wit, I am ill and I am dying." Wickham said nothing, but his face altered just a bit. To what expression could not be discerned, but he was no longer quite so aggrieved. "The night that you came to my aid in Bromley." "Bromley?" Wickham wrinkled his brow. "When was this?" Darcy rolled his eyes. "I suppose that I can presume, for however drunk I was, you must have been equally so. In any case, when my cousin came and retrieved me from that inn, he—" For a moment, Darcy faltered. In truth, he did not know how it all came about. Someone sent an express, and Fitzwilliam got him. When exactly? From the inn, and then what? Called the doctor? Had he seen a physician at Bromley? It occurred to him that a great deal of that night was unaccounted to him. So abstracted, he scarcely noticed that Wickham continued to speak. "I have no idea what you're speaking of." "What I wish to say," Darcy recalled himself to his purpose, "you did me a good turn, and I am appreciative of it. I know not what might have become of me in Bromley had you not cared for me, but that night has proven rather fateful for me. Wickham leant back, looking bemused. Faithful? It was my actions in Bromley that soon led to the understanding that I have an incurable illness and will soon die. Wickham looked down with a little frown on his face. You Darcys might have enviable fortunes, but you lack in years to spend it. Perhaps so, Darcy acknowledged. In any case, I want you to know, the words stuck in his throat a bit. Could he say this? I regret the part that I have played in our estrangement, and I offer to you my forgiveness of your misdeeds as well. Wickham said nothing, studying his old friend, his eyes flicking over him in a casual way. That is all. You may depart if you so wish, or if there is more you would like to say, please do so. I know that neither of us is comfortable. Very well, Wickham said slowly. I will offer what I can and say that I am sorry for my attempt on your sister. It is money, Darcy, nothing more. Pray do for me this much, said Darcy earnestly. When I am gone, when I am no longer able to protect her, leave her alone. Do not make any attempt to contact her, not even for condolence. Will you do that for me? I suppose, said Wickham with a careless shrug. Consider it a promise to me on my deathbed, if you will. Leave her alone. Wickham yawned, holding up both hands. Very well, deathbed vow, and all that implies. By the way, what's wrong with you? A disease of the brain, Darcy replied, satisfied to have gotten as much as he had. So noted by the loss of symmetry in my face. Wickham was not impressed. You look to me as you always have, although I see you're rather gray-colored. Get a bit of sun on your face. That will do for that. How kind of you to notice, said Darcy dryly. I will take your advice into consideration. Wickham shrugged, pausing to look at him a moment more before excusing himself. I must be off now. A military life is not one given to time for individual pursuits. Darcy nodded, and with that, Wickham was gone. As the carriage began the journey back to Netherfield, Darcy reflected that the truly odd part of the meeting was that Wickham had not requested any money. He shook his head with disgust. How drunk had Wickham been that he did not even recall being in Bromley? Darcy arrived at Longbourn at the hour appointed, such anxiety and nervousness plaguing him throughout his journey that he could scarcely remain still atop his horse. He was shown in by Mrs. Hill, who looked at him curiously, but said only that which was appropriate. Elizabeth awaited him, which made him still more anxious. Evidently, her father had informed him of the need for the interview. She said nothing, silent and grave, while Mrs. Hill saw to his comfort. Then they both went into the sitting room. This is a surprise, Mr. Darcy, she said at last. I know it is, and please know that I am exceedingly grateful to you and your father for arranging this time for us to speak. She looked like she might say more, but he interrupted her. Would you sit, please? Looking wary, she did as he asked, perching on the edge of a light-colored settee. He remained standing, his hands clasped behind his back. I wish first to say how terribly sorry I am for all that I have done which has caused you in any measure grief or embarrassment or vexation. From the first moment of our acquaintance, I have not treated you as I should, and my regrets in this are many. She said nothing to that. I also regret heartily the offensive nature of my proposal. I should not have spoken of your family as I did, nor should I have done anything that hurt you, even my letter. Did you perchance read it? I did. Thank you. I wrote it with the intent of explaining myself, wishing you to think better of me, but I do realize now it was written in a dreadful bitterness of spirit. So this too, I beg forgiveness for. She gave a slight nod and a half smile, of course. I have also spoken to Bingley, he added, regarding the fact that I was sorely mistaken in my opinions of your sister's affections. He knows the truth now. Yet he did not return to Netherfield with you. I believe he shall join me before long, Darcy said. A beloved aunt in Scarborough has passed, and he is required to go settle her affairs for her. I see. After a brief pause, she added, still speaking with a bit of reserve, I would like to offer my apologies as well for so judging you about the situation with Mr. Wickham. Think nothing of that, he replied immediately. No. She shook her head, looking down. I am ashamed of my behavior. I should not have heard his lies, nor should I have believed him so readily. And above all, I should not have contributed to the spread of them. I am sorry. Very well, he said with a faint smile. As you have so generously forgiven me, so too are you wholeheartedly forgiven. I must own, however, that even before you spoke, I harbored no ill against you. It was that which I adore in you that most caused you to believe Wickham's tales, your compassionate heart. She looked up quickly, turning pink from his compliment. Thank you. She dropped her eyes again, not seeing when he moved quickly into the seat beside her. She rose immediately on feeling his weight settle next to her. It seems we have settled it between us, so let us return to the party and, not just yet, if you please. There is something else. His heart began to pound furiously. I need to ask something of you, a favor of sorts, rather a large one. Very well. Hesitantly, she lowered herself back into the seat she had so recently vacated. What is it? The words were at once lodged firmly in his throat. The enormity of what he was about to request came upon him. It might have been easier had she shown any sign of interest in him, but she did not. She was indifferent. An improvement, perhaps, from having formerly despised him, but minimal at best. Candor in the fullest sense was required, he decided. She might pity him, it was true, but there was no point in maintaining pride at such a time. I've had a bit of bad news recently, he said. Exceedingly bad, in fact. I have learned that I am afflicted with a very grave illness. I expect that this summer shall be my last. She startled, her posture growing stiff as she quickly turned her head to look at him directly. She was, he thought, rather satisfyingly distressed looking. But how? You seem quite, no, surely not. It cannot be true. I am afraid it is very true, he told her. I've heard it myself from an expert. If you will notice, my face is not, I am losing symmetry. Not so alarming in and of itself, but it is indicative of a greater problem within my brain, a problem that will cause my demise in just a few months. She stared at him for a moment, agape. He was shocked when she raised her hands, looking almost dreamlike as she laid her fingers on his cheeks, tracing lightly over the contours of his face. You seem perfectly symmetrical to me, sir. No, he said ruefully. If you look closely, you will see that my ears are not quite the same size. My dimples no longer align, and one brow is lengthened in comparison to the other. She did indeed look closely, but her judgment was evidently not the same as his. She gave him a brief, puzzled look, then said, her voice trembling a little, your physicians must surely know better than I, but allow me to say how very sorry I am to hear it. I will admit to you it is a struggle to accept it myself, but I must. I will die, and soon, and all I can do for it is settle my affairs and see that there is nothing left to answer for when I am gone. He gave her another smile, and it seemed to undo her. Excuse me. She rose hastily, going to the window and looking out, her back to him. He watched as she drew deep breaths and eventually began rustling about in her skirts, seeking something. A handkerchief? He rose and went to her, offering his own. Though he stood behind her, he could see her face reflected in the glass and see the shine of tears on her cheeks. Elizabeth, pray, do not weep for me. Do not weep for you. She half laughed and half sobbed. She took the handkerchief and pressed it to her eyes and turned, finding herself very nearly within his arms. I am so very, very sorry. It is not fair at all. He was moved by her sincerity, and so moved, reached for her almost unthinkingly, pressing her to his chest. Who could not wish to touch someone so dear to them at such a time? He did not wrap his arms around her, permitting himself just one arm pressed lightly against her back. Thank you. She allowed his embrace for a moment. He felt her shuddering breath as she gained control over herself before pulling back slightly and looking up into his face. I begin to think you really are good, she said. My prejudice blinded me to the truth of you before, but how admirable that such a time you do not succumb to pity, but rather move forward, mindful to those who depend on you to the end. I would be lying if I did not tell you that pity and despair do haunt me at times, he admitted. Sorrow, some anger, I cannot deny it. Those things do me no good, however, and I would like to live out my last days with some pleasure, if I may. That is where I need you. Me? Let us sit again, he said. This time they sat together with no reservation. Her eyes bore a bit of dampness around them, although she maintained a determined air of equanimity. I must apply to you for something of great importance to me, he said. It is no small matter, though, and were it not for my affection for you, I could never dare broach the subject. Anything at all. No, no, you must not say that, he said with a little laugh. What I will ask for is something that will forever alter the course of your existence. It cannot be given lightly. Forever alter the course of my existence? Elizabeth gave him a rather charming look, somewhat teasing. Such sweet words, Mr. Darcy, and with a hint of mystery. You must know that such sentiments can only entice me. He felt his heart leap a bit and hoped it was only due to her and not his illness. Well, I must do as I can to raise my prospects. Her teasing look became quizzical as he continued. I spoke the truth when I told you at Hunsford that I loved you. I have loved you for several months now, though the precise moment cannot be known, for it took me some time to recognize it for what it was. However, it has been some time that I knew you were the only woman I could ever truly love, the only one who I could imagine marrying, and the only one with whom I would wish to raise a family. He cleared his throat. I need a wife, Elizabeth. I would like to see that the future of my name and my state is secured before I depart this mortal coil. But I could not entrust those things to anyone but someone I held in the highest regard. Her eyes raised now, astonished and a bit alarmed, and her mouth dropped, forming a perfect O. You, he said, I wish only for you to aid me in these my last days. It was hopeful, he thought, that she did not immediately deny him. Think of this, he said, his voice growing stronger. A few months of marriage to me, and you will have security your whole life long. I will leave you well cared for, whether or not we have a child. He reached into his pocket, withdrawing a paper that he handed to her. It was folded. After a questioning look in his direction, she unfolded it, looking at it carefully. Pemberley and all its holdings were laid before her. To her credit, she did not gasp or in any manner give way to her shock. But then again, he supposed he had already shocked her so deeply that to shock her further might be impossible. This will be your part of it, he told her, pointing at the page. No matter what, this sum is yours, wholly yours, whether or not you bear my child, whether or not you produce an heir, whether you... Brief momentary distaste arose in his throat and seized his breath. Marry again. I mean, of course you shall marry again. I hope you marry. I want nothing but happiness for you. I hardly, she stammered. This is very generous, Mr. Darcy. No, it is not really, he told her. If you think about it carefully, I believe you will know that I am asking a great deal of you. I need someone who can carry on, someone who is witty and clever, someone who I can depend upon to maintain my holdings and raise my child if fortune should so smile upon us. She took a deep breath, refolding the paper that he had given her and handing it back to him. With a quick gesture, he indicated that she should keep it. Moreover, I would like it if we could, anxiety rendered him stupid. He had no idea how to ask for what he wanted most. She smiled with such kindness that he allowed himself to hope. I know, he said with renewed determination, that you do not love me. But if possible, I would like to feel cared for. I do not ask that you pretend to some great love for me, but friendship and caring, I would like that. Of course, she said immediately, of course I could never agree to such a thing, intending to treat you with animosity or spite. Thank you, he said with an embarrassed smile. Of course, there is also the matter of, she waited patiently. Perhaps this point is obvious, but for a child, an heir for Pemberley, that is truly what has driven me to overcome my natural disinclination towards, who knows whether Georgiana will marry or what will come. He stopped, realizing he was babbling like a madman. Gathering as much composure as he could, he said, I would not wish you to enter into this unless you understood that it was not merely marriage I wanted. I need, that is to say, we would have to, she dropped her eyes, blushing deeply. I understand. All had been said, and now he wanted only for her answer. He regarded her quietly as she considered his offer. So you wish to marry me and carry on just as we would in any marriage of true affection in hopes of conceiving a child. Yes, he said. And then he teased her. It's not so very much to ask, is it? She smiled absently. I need to think about this, she said at last. May I have until Friday? I wish to consider it all carefully. Of course, he told her, such a decision cannot be made lightly. You will likely wish to marry immediately. If you would not object to it, I could get a license. Very well then, I understand the offer you have made to me. He rose then, extending his hand to assist her to her feet. She took it, rising and standing before him. She did not move right away. I am not insensible to the compliment of your affection, she said. I recognize that you have honored me in asking you, as you have, to do this for you. However, may I ask just one thing? Of course. What about your cousin? She had not removed her hand from his, allowing it to rest in his palm. He likely believed he should not, and yet he did begin to caress her knuckles with his thumb. I had often heard you were promised to her, and the advantages of such a union are considerable. It seems that this would have been the easiest solution to your dilemma. It is the clear answer, is it not? He said. And I was very surprised that my uncle and Colonel Fitzwilliam seemed to think it a foregone conclusion. But as you have noted, I am selfish, and though I have tried to attend to those things that you have charged me with, I am nonetheless determined that my last days shall include as much joy and pleasure as I can. He waited until she looked at him and added, only you, Elizabeth, can bring me the happiness I have so longed for. Okay, so that's a fine joke, everyone. And it's a funny story. It's novella length. I think it's about 35,000 words, and yeah, it's on pre-order. So anyway, I promise it's funny. It's not a sad story. That what I just read to you was sad, I know, but it's really not. It's called A Fine Joke for a reason. So,
I have three words to say about this. Buy
Yes.
this book.
Thank you, Jack. And sadly, I have just realized, dang, I have quite used up my time and don't want to go into anyone else's time. So a willful misunderstanding, though, you know, I'll be putting out excerpts. I'll be posting some on the blog. So if you're following our